Hello and welcome to this episode of Data Driven, where Frank and Andy announce a brand new project and talk about the importance of getting stuff done.
Hello and welcome to Data Driven, the podcast where we explore the emerging fields of data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So this is a bit of a kind of not really a full-on episode of sorts. This is Andy and I announcing, and if you hear that, that means that the folks are mowing my lawn. And of course, the dogs have to bark at them because they've never seen them before. And but I figured, Andy, that during the pandemic, people are used to barking dogs and random noises in the background on kind of work calls.
I think so.
Cool. So I will try to clean this up as much as possible in post, but
Now
I know that's going to be leave it.
It's authentic, Frank.
It's authentic. Okay, I'll go with authentic. So the what we're doing today is actually not so much recording a full-on episode. We are announcing that we are starting another podcast. That's right. After 3 successful years of Data Driven, we have decided to announce, at least for a start, kind of a mini series of a podcast about just quantum computing.
Yep.
And the reason why it's a mini series is, and as opposed to kind of like a series or we inject it in the show, is we don't want to pollute kind of the data science AI focus of Data Driven and, into kind of, and drop a lot of quantum stuff. We'll probably talk about quantum in so much how it relates to data and AI and machine learning. But there's a whole new class of compute that's going to be available in the not that distant future. Arguably, this is available now.
That's what I was going to jump in and say, Frank, because, just having access to, to the coding, to be able to code in that, in Visual Studio has driven, some of the, some breakthroughs actually. And we don't even have the hardware, generally available yet.
Right. And we'll talk more about kind of why that is, but here's kind of the teaser for it, if you will. It is because every logic gate that we've worked with since the dawn of electronics has basically been based on the function of how electrons work, or they either flow or they don't flow, right? On or off.
Right.
The circuit is on, the circuit is off. What quantum computing does is it adds a third state. And I think we did a deep dive on quantum computing a few months ago.
Yep.
So if you want to kind of geek out on that, you can kind of listen to that or listen to the new show, preferably.
Yeah, both. You can do both.
You could do both. Why not both? So the key is that because it adds that third state, what the cool kids call superposition, where it's both 1 and 0 at the same time, that actually fundamentally changes some of the logic, how algorithms are going to be written at the logic gate level. And we had reached out to some former guests who might have some kind of work in this field. And I won't say his name yet, but he kind of dropped something I had never heard, a quantum database.
Yes.
Which blew my mind. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I had never heard that term.
I hadn't either.
And so I think that it's definitely a field that it will impact, I think, everybody in the technology space one way or the other.
Yeah, totally.
Particularly the data and AI and high performance compute stuff first.
Yeah.
So along those lines, I think there's content enough, I think, for a show. And the show. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say I think so too. But go ahead. Keep describing, Frank. You're doing a great job.
So the show, we're calling it Impact Quantum, and it's about the impact. See how I did that? I led into that. It's going to impact.
I like that. You're natural.
Yeah, totally natural. So it's called Impact Quantum, and it's meant to be a podcast for software engineers and data engineers and AI folk as well, AI engineers. Because the problem, and I see kind of, maybe it's the data scientist in me, but I'm seeing a pattern here, a time series pattern, if you will. 4 or 5 years ago, if you looked at any data science kind of training material, it had the assumption that you had deep familiarity with statistics. It had the assumption that you had a PhD, right? Remember,
Yeah.
that was a debate. People forget about that now.
I know.
And I think what data science and AI did for statisticians and mathematicians, I think quantum is going to do for physicists and kind of particle physicists, that type of crowd, right?
Right.
I think you're already seeing that. You're already seeing the big players get into this space, and they hire, if you look around the job requirements right now for quantum, it basically PhDs are a prerequisite.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say it looks very familiar.
Right, and I'm kind of looking into this, and I'm like, I've seen this happen before. Wasn't that a Battlestar Galactic thing? All this has happened before, and all this will happen again.
Yes, yeah.
Or to quote George Lucas, I think George Lucas or somebody once said, history kind of has a rhyme, has a rhythm to it, or rhymes.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that here with quantum. And I think also it was important. So I had the idea for this podcast less than 2 weeks ago. And if you know the origin story, the superhero origin story of Data Driven, I got the idea in November and we didn't launch till May. Yeah. So I'm trying to be a lot more agile with this one. So things are not going to be quite as polished, I think, in that sense. But I wanted to launch while the iron is hot, because right now, if you look at the landscape for quantum computing podcasts, there's only maybe 3, maybe 4. And 2 of them have been shut down since middle of last year. They kind of had that pod fade. Yeah. And oddly enough, again, history repeats itself, right? When we first had the idea of Data Driven, it was very similar. It might have been 5 or 6, So kind of seeing that and seeing how data science has radically transformed the industry, I thought it was just best to just launch.
I love it, Frank. I mean, what's the worst that can happen is that, we got a few shows out, and then it's just a series that we can link to from Data Driven. And if we just keep going with it, and and we've had seasons with Data Driven as well. You and I have gone through various periods of availability. Thankfully, it's kind of overlapped. For the most part, we were either really available or really not available. So who knows? And our listeners, if that frustrates you, I'm really sorry that it does, that it is a little frustrating. I've actually had some encounters with fans of the show who've come up and said, "Hey, you need to do a new show. It's been a while." They're right. They're absolutely right. And I don't know what to say other than this is a labor of love for both of us. And if we were independently wealthy, Frank and I would be doing shows every single day. And that I know.
Oh, ditto.
We love this. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things, and I can imagine, with that in mind, I can imagine a lot of fans are saying, hey, what's going to happen to Data Driven? Data Driven is going to be the primary show, period. End of discussion.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. We can't stop doing Data Driven.
Right. This is kind of a side project. We've also, if you've been paying attention to kind of what's been going on with our live feeds, we've actually, so in my mind, in terms of content creation, the real cost of content creation is time.
Yeah.
Right. And if you've been, kind of looking at my blog, franksworld.com, I've really gotten down the cost, quote unquote, down to, I can get a blog post out in about 90 seconds.
My goodness.
May not be a long, pithy statement, but
sure.
I can get one out.
Yeah.
Right. So this all kind of started, I'm going to go on a tangent, which I guess that's
never
what
happened.
we do.
Never happened.
All right. So I'm going to go back in time to 2013 or so. I wanted to do or 2012, 2013, that era, about 7, 8 years ago,
Yeah.
I want to do a YouTube channel. And I realized that, first thing when you say you want to do something, and this, if you listen to us and we talk about Grant Cardone, like it's very predictable. Like say, I want to do something new, right? First thing people say, where are you going to find time for that? Right.
Yeah.
And,
no, he's right.
And try it yourself. If you don't believe us, do some data science on your own, right? Tell 10 people you're going to start writing a book or something like that. Some people, and they are going to be in the minority, I'm sorry to say, is going to say, that's great, that's awesome. But the second thing are going to be people saying, when are you going to find time to do that? And the third group of people are going to be also not a lot, but it probably breaks out 10, 60, and then 30. Right. So 10% will say that's awesome. 60% will say where you're going to find the time to do that. And the remainder will probably say, no one reads books anymore. Right. Sort of. Now you're talking to folks that I've written a book, although it was on Silverlight, and I don't talk about that, but Andy's written a number of books. So clearly, and there's a bunch of other people that have written books, and clearly, the publishing industry obviously is going through some challenges because of COVID and all that. But if you recall, Amazon made its business on selling books originally before they sold toothbrushes and stuff like that.
Everything
and everything else. They were that. So the notion that nobody reads books anymore, I think, is easily debunkable. Particularly with the rise of Kindle and stuff like that.
Yeah. They're just different formats.
They're just different formats, right? The other thing is people say, where are you going to find the time? And this is something that it's hard to believe at first, but when you kind of like look at the people who are successful, everybody on the earth has the same 24 hours. Of all the things in this world that are not distributed evenly, right?
Yeah.
Time is really the only thing that is evenly distributed.
That's true.
Everybody gets the same 24 hours in a day. And if you watch that Bill Gates documentary, and I've only seen the first couple episodes of it, where he talks about, he doesn't care about spending money. He worries more about spending time, because time is something he can't get back.
Yep.
Now, for those of you scratching your chin thinking, well, it's easy for him to say he's a billionaire. Yes, he is, isn't he? I had this debate with somebody, and here's our movie reference, where somebody was telling me they were going to try to do this, they were going to try to do that. Yeah. And then I said, well, are you going to do it, or are you going to try to do it? Mm-hmm. What do you mean? And I was like, quoted Yoda, right? Do or do not. There is no try. And they were like, well, that's a fictional character, something like that. Well, it's easy for a Jedi Master to say, was kind of the response I got. And I said, well, is he saying that because he's a Jedi Master, or is he a Jedi Master because he says that and believes it and lives it?
Yeah.
And you can tell sometimes when you flash, when you can see in their people's eyes when they hit a blue screen, like in their mind, like, you make them stop and think. It's like, oh. But anyway, back on the tangent.
Yeah, that's funny.
We ended up, and getting back. Honestly, complaining about somebody mowing your own lawn is the epitome of first world problems. But anyway, so the key here is that it's not about time, right? Time is the only thing. So the best way, I learned this when I was doing the DC Tech Minute shows, right? I did them daily, right? Much to the chagrin of a lot of folks who will remain nameless, who told me that, I should get kind of film school students to do the work for free. But that's a story for another. Yeah. That might work in New York or LA, but not in DC. Like this, that's not going to happen. Exactly. Anyway, so I kind of came up with a formula of not just to produce that, and I didn't hit it every day, but 3 to 4 times a week, guaranteed, I would produce a new video, and that included audio and animation. So the real key was to find a way to reduce the time it took to create the content. And there's 2 ways to do that, right? One is, you don't have to write a novella in every blog post, right?
Right.
So the short of it is that ever since then, I've been kind of obsessed about reducing the amount of time it takes to produce good content. Not perfect content, but good content.
Yeah.
Better than good enough, but certainly fall short of perfect. So if you look at Frank's World, you know, I can't write 50 to 100, you know, long form blog posts every day, right? Or every month. That's just not possible. But you know what I can do? And I think there was a need for this, and my traffic is showing that, right? I'm getting 200,000 to 300,000 views per month now on that site, which is starting to get expensive. But more on that in a minute. So I came up, I created a bunch of tools that get it down to. I timed it when that it would take me about 15 minutes to push out a blog post. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, what am I doing? What am I spending? Right. So I got it down. I wrote a couple of automation tools that kind of make it easier for me. So now I can get it down to about 90 seconds. In practice, if I want to add edits or add thoughts to it, and you'll see that I often do, I can do it in about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, realistically. So this morning, for instance, I think I got 6 blog posts out before 9 a.m. And I started at like 8:30, right?
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
I mean, it's possible. You just have to you have to ignore the 90% of people who will tell you that people don't read that and they don't do that.
Yeah.
And
so
that's kind of a long-winded way. So one of the things with Data Driven is that we found creative ways to extend the content reach of our show, including data points, right? Data points was originally, that was not part of the master plan, if you recall, Andy.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
But I happened to be at a place where we were doing a walk against cancer. And I was like, hey, and we just interviewed Lynn Langett, who was done amazing work with cancer research in bioinformatics. And I just recorded a Facebook Live, right? Nothing fancy, right? You know, my kid was jumping in the background and that sort of thing, and nothing fancy. So then I found a way to extract the audio from that, and I dropped in the podcast feed just for grins. And here we are, right? It's it's one of our more popular formats.
I was going to say, we've done more of those shows than anything else. You've done like 90% of them, and they're fantastic. Nice short form on the spot. And we've got a pretty even distribution of people listening to the audio only once you drop that over on datadriven.tv. And the folks watching it live, subscribe. We picked up subscribers to the Facebook page once you started doing that, because that's where you send them.
Right.
But then you push a button and the automation happens and it just blows out a show.
Right. So I subscribe to another service called repurpose.io, which does all the automation for me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, it's an extra cost, but I mean, I can push out something like 3 different ways. So one recording that we do live, whether it's you in Baltimore or me, at a stadium, right? We can record, and I can have that, I hit done, and this whole process happens in the background that extracts the audio. Then I edit the audio. I kind of clean it up, which I've gotten really good at, by the way.
Yeah.
And then we can push out a show. I mean, there was one time that our signing moment was we belted out 5 data points, or you belted out 5 data points. And it was, you were in Ireland. You were in SQL Saturday Dublin.
Yeah.
This is back when for kids, this is back when people actually went places and congregated in groups. I don't know when that'll happen again, but
we're not sure if, but yes. And that was just, it was one of those times, Frank, where it just, the stars aligned and I was able to talk to a bunch of people.
Right.
Kind of some, stars of the community. I didn't talk to all of them that were there. That was my disappointment, but I did present some. And so, yeah, that plus the automation, it's like you said. I think I blogged about this, even about people asking me how I get things done. And it's like, I look at me and go, my gosh, I'm wasting 90% of my time.
I do the same thing.
But the key, when I step back, I guess I don't do the comparison thing, because that was one of the things first lessons from Uncle G, Grant Cardone. He said, "Don't do that." So he was right. I wasn't doing it a lot before, but I just totally nixed it. But one of the kickers that I blogged about, I think, was that space between, right? That's that's what gets you. So if you do a task, let's say in the morning it takes an hour, you do a task, you get it done, you feel good about it for a couple hours, and then maybe mid afternoon you do another thing. Well, you've done two things, and let's just say they both take an hour, but you've done 2 hour long things in like a 6 hour span. So in between there was like 4 solid hours. You were, I was wasting eating and, anyway. But if I'd reduced that from 4 hours in between to 4 minutes, dude, that's what turned the crank for me. That's what really got me cranking out code and delivering content. And my blog posts take more than 90 seconds, but I write different things, different topics, and that's not saying one's better than the other. It's just, could I write faster? Probably. But yeah, I mean, the idea that content is king doesn't live in a vacuum. I mean, that cranking out shows, cranking out blog posts, keeping eyeballs returning to the site, or sites in our cases. That's just a good way to do it. And you're totally right about books and people who complain about the books. I've gotten more comments. As I've mentioned, I'm working on a second edition of a book I wrote 3 years ago. I've gotten more comments that are in line with, nobody reads books. Why are you wasting your time? And another thing, that you and I, Frank, key on is don't do what everybody else is doing, or do what they're not doing. Find
Also,
new.
Uncle G, Grant Cardone thing.
Absolutely, yeah, and not just him. What Warren Buffett is kind of like that as well, right? Sell when people are buying, buy when they're selling, and so it's
So, I mean, I would say, let's make this inspirational, right? Like, if you think you don't have time to do whatever it is you want to do, whether that's writing a book, whether that's, starting a blog or starting a podcast, you do have the time. You just have to kind of align things so it'll work. It's just like playing pool, right? You line up the shot,
right.
You just don't randomly. And I think, myself included, up until a few years ago, I would just randomly kind of just using the pool billiards example, I would just randomly throw stuff. But if you line up the shots and you kind of do it strategically, you actually do have a lot more time than you have.
Oh, I remember
really good audiobook that I listened to recently was by Marie Forleo. It's called Everything is Figure Outable, and she basically said, just install this app on your phone. It's called there's an iOS one, and then there's a Android one. But on Android, it's called Stay Free, and it basically logs how much time you spend looking at your phone and breaks it down by application.
Wow,
you will be alarmed. I mean, I thought I was not that bad. I knew I used to be bad, but I thought I was getting better. But I mean, there were days where I could rack up 5.5 hours on my phone.
Well, I was going to say, Frank, you've been doing this already, so I can't wait to see how now that you've got this app and you're paying attention to it. But I remember you did a trip out to Redmond, and you were just bam, 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 talking to people, doing data points. It was, I don't know how many you did that day. It was more than 5. I can tell you that. And
5 is our record. I think I did 4, so I came close to the record. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
or maybe it was throughout the whole trip. I might have did like 16 or something like that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was incredible, and you're totally right. And you and I have both been asked that same question. How do you get so much done? And you and I both kind of have the same response. It's like, okay, how much TV do you watch?
Right. Well, also too, I think it's kind of like what you've written about is something that I say is we've weaponized their ADD, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It turns out it's a good thing.
Right. And you can you can take all the things. So I kind of had this moment of clarity, and I'll probably write a book about this. And I'm announcing it now, so that
there
way
you go.
The fan base will hold me to this. But the key here is again, speaking of ADD, I didn't get that thought out fast enough. No, but I mean, ultimately, if you can kind of, people say, don't work on your flaws, work on your strengths.
Right.
Because the conventional wisdom is, work on your flaws, make your flaws better. The more kind of nouveau wisdom is, work on your strengths, because your strengths will take you further than even if you patch up your flaws. I kind of came to this revelation that, you know what? Who says they have to be flaws? What if you were to find something that works horrible for you normally, conventionally,
Mm-hmm.
and you flip it around and you weaponize it, right? Like, if I do have a short attention span, maybe writing, and I don't always have a short attention span, but most of the time I operate in that phase because, squirrel, right?
Mm.
But if you kind of just say, well, okay, well, how can I adjust my life so I can make this work for me? So that's when I kind of came up with the idea of the short form blog posts and stuff like that. And
Nice.
just kind of doing stuff quicker, right? And this is also something I was inspired by Grant Cardone. Not so much the weaponized thing, but where he said speed is the new big.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at every startup and why they're more agile, there's many reasons why they're more agile, but one of the reasons they're successful is that they're able to pivot a lot faster than traditional.
And it falls right in with a couple of concepts that you and I are both big fans of. One is failing fast.
Right.
You're going to fail if it bothers you to fail. I don't know what to tell you to go do in 2020. It's definitely not related to technology. That much I know, because failing. I fail all the time, but failing forward, failing fast, those are great concepts. The other one is this idea from Nassim Taleb about anti-fragile, anti-fragility. And I was listening to Fortitude by Dan Crenshaw. He is representative, U.S. House of Representatives, representative from Texas, and he was a former SEAL. He lost his eye in combat, probably the most noticeable thing, but just very interesting. I know, Frank, you've been listening to a lot of audiobooks recently about Stoicism. He has a chapter in there about that and how he responds and doesn't react to this. But he was actually mentioned Anti-Fragile in that audiobook. And actually, that's an audiobook my son Stevie Ray turned me on. He wants to be a SEAL. He wants to go try out.
Oh, cool.
That. Yeah, and goodness, I tell you, man, it's less than a year. He graduates, and he's thinking of signing up right after graduation to the U.S. Navy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but it's all of these things kind of come together, right? I mean, when you start thinking about how these bits and pieces and it's been small, subtle changes, mostly. I mean, there's been some big changes for me, big changes for you, but mostly it's been these little changes that we've made that that's enabled us to do what we've done so far, and we both look forward to doing a lot more later. I mean, that's why we're doing this. So we're trying to do continuous improvement on. I'm working on Andy. You're working on Frank.
No, absolutely. And so speaking of which, we mentioned a bunch of audiobooks. Audible is a sponsor of the show, and you go to thedatadrivenbook.com. It'll route you to an Audible page, and you'll get one free audiobook. And if you sign up for a subscription, they give us a little bit of money, so it helps us keep the show going.
Yep.
As well as some of our ambitious, more expansive plans. But I'm excited. I'm excited about this new show. It's called Impact Quantum. Don't worry, it's not going to affect things. Unlike Data Driven, so there's a couple of challenges here, and I was thinking about waiting until we can kind of address this. But you know what? No, I'm not going to wait till it's perfect. One of the big problems is it's hard to find experts in quantum computing that are willing to talk about it kind of on a podcast, right? So one, the experts are hard to find, and then two, how do you get somebody to talk about it is quite another. We have some incidents in the past with famous people on Twitter that we tried. Well, only one incident, but it's enough to make us a little bit more thoughtful about how we approach people. But
very, very true. And that was all my fault. I'm sorry for it.
Don't worry about it. I mean,
got us blocked on Twitter.
Whatever. Anyway, so the short of it is that, so these shows are probably going to be, might stream some of them live because some of it does require visual explanations. And some of it will require, kind of experts, like actual physicists and that sort of thing. And our goal for the show, and we'll explain this, is how do we explain this in a way that engineers can get, right? So, if you start a lot of quantum material right now, you start reading it, it's like, what are they talking about? I have a headache. Right. I got to go. But it doesn't have to be that way. I've actually seen it explained very eloquently and in ways that make sense to software developers and data engineers, right? So like there is a way forward. And, I want to blaze that trail. I was watching kind of and following the Trailblazers the last time during the data science kind of rise of data science. This time I want to pay that forward and be one of the Trailblazers.
Awesome.
Say what you want about Suraj Raval, but he was able to take very complicated concepts and explain it in ways that, regular software developers and engineers can understand.
That's accurate.
Which is, the tragedy of Suraj Raval is the plagiarism, but his true talent isn't necessarily doing his own research. His true talent is explaining things in ways that the layman or lay person can understand, and in an entertaining way. And that's why I refused to bash him publicly, because he was one of the few people that was saying, no, you don't need to get a PhD to do this. You can do this. You can start your own startup. You can, you can change your career. And he was a bright candle in kind of a dim tunnel of time of my life. So, yeah, for that, I'm grateful. And I want to pay that forward. I want to be that for somebody else. I'm going to try to avoid the plagiarism thing, though.
Yeah, don't do that.
I'm trying to avoid that. That's kind of, and Andy and I have kind of come to the realization is that what we really want to do in our lives is help people. Right. And help people. This is one way to help people, particularly now with the pandemic, because there's a lot of people who are misplaced out of their normal jobs and careers. And how can people kind of, not just have the learn to code conversation, because that's very dense and very non-empathetic in my mind, is how that phrase has kind of come about. Yeah. But also kind of transform themselves in a way that they can find a better career that takes advantage of their strengths and even weaponizes their weaknesses.
Frank, we're only talking about, we're only sharing about stuff we've done. I mean, we're not, right. We're not saying we read this in a book or a magazine article, blog, whatever. We're talking about, we've lived these transformations. We've both reinvented ourselves more than once, and we know how to at least continue eating, as we move from as we pivot from career to career. Is probably the best way to say that.
Right, and I mean it's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy.
It is not. If it was easy, anyone could do it. And I'm reminded as I sat here and look at the one of the final chapters in this book I'm working on, Grant Cardone has a book named The 10X Rule. And in essence, he said it's going to take 10 times as long as you imagine to complete something. It's going to be 10 times harder than you believe it is. And I'm sitting here going, yep, I'm at about 8.5X right now. on both. I mean, this should have been done at the beginning of the summer. It's not, but it will be. And, it'll be way better than the thing I'm not going to skimp on, Frank, on this. And this is something we both agree on, is we're never skimping on quality. We're going to deliver quality every single time. And Frank, I knew this, I don't know, a couple of decades ago when I first got into tech full time. It was a hobby for, 25 years. And then I started doing it for a living. I had this little saying, and I think I may have coined this, but I said, if you deliver, let's see, how does it go? If you deliver quality late, no one remembers. If you deliver junk on time, no one forgets.
This is true. If you look at if you look at the first iPhone, and there's a number of YouTubers that have actually, they kind of unbox and first generation iPhone, and they use it, and it's just an absolute piece of garbage with 2020 eyes.
So true. Yeah, so true.
And you kind of go back and you think, like, it's the whole thing. And I have I might make it the thumbnail for this episode, actually. So it's something I saw on Instagram, where it said something like, just don't acquire knowledge. Alone it's useless, because knowledge without action is folly. I think that's what it says. Futile, that's what it said. And it has a picture of a guy in a cap and gown, and there's a donkey also in a cap and gown. And it's funny. I sent you a picture of it. I have that where I can see in my home office at all time, because it's I've read the books. I've read a lot of self-improvement books over the years, but it wasn't until Grant Cardone said something that resonated, and it was basically the 10X rule, that I was like, you know what? I got to execute. Gary Vee says this too.
Yeah.
And if you hear the term 10X and you think back to that blog post that some guy wrote about a 10X engineer, this is not the same thing. Just put that out there.
Exactly. That was, and I have mixed emotions about that concept. I'll just say that.
Right. I mean, that is, I think, I don't know if it's related to Grant Cardone, if he read it and misunderstood it, or it's completely separately evolved. But if you hear the term 10X, and if that's the first thing that pops in your head, I recommend tuning into the 10X rule with a clear mind, like without preconceived notions. Because when I talk about that, I actually have sorry, what?
That's good advice about a lot of things. Do a little research.
Well, yeah, I wasn't going to go there, but that is good advice. So with that, I know this is a rather unconventional episode, but I wanted to announce the arrival of Impact Quantum podcast. And the site will actually live on Data Driven site for cost reasons, I think, for now. We are always looking for good sponsors that can share a good message and product or service with our audience, and that will help us expand into other ventures and stuff like that.
Sure.
And just if you think that we think we're super cool people because we do all this stuff, you should see the OneNote notebook that Andy and I have about all the things we want to do. Or more the painful point is all the things we should have done by now.
Yeah, right? That's true. That is so true.
And that hurts. And I look at that, and when I don't feel like doing something, I kind of look at that. I'm like, oh God, I'm such a slacker. I mean, if you remember, we talked about Data Soup. Data Soup, actually, a year ago today, we had Data Soup, the Data Soup Summit.
We did.
Before virtual summits were cool. And we were hoping to do one kind of once a quarter.
Yeah.
And we had a stretch goal in mind monthly.
Yeah, we thought, that's what I was going to say. We thought once a quarter would be a piece of soup.
Right. Turns out it wasn't. So I mean, that's also a thing too. Like, I don't beat myself up too much about that, because I think that's part of the things that 10X rule is, like, if you throw more spaghetti at the wall, something more will stick. Yeah. I mean, despite everything that's happened in both our lives in the last 12 to 18 months, and there's been some doozies thrown our way.
Yeah.
I have had 18, 19 months of every month I've had 100 plus blog posts. Yep. We've produced the show, maybe not as much and sometimes as we wanted to, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I also want to set a precedent for Quantum, because scheduling is a big issue, because if it's Andy and I talking, that's two people's schedules. If you have a third person who's the guest, that's three schedules to coordinate, which, guess what? That actually starts getting complicated.
Yeah, it's like the exponent, right? When it's just me and Frank, it's four vectors in play. When we add that third person, now it's 8.
Right. So, but there was one time that you had scheduled an interview, and I was on vacation at the time, and I was like, "Oh crap!" And you're like, "Just don't do it." And I'm like, "But why don't you do it alone?" And you were like, "I don't feel like I should do a data-driven show without you." And I feel the same way. So I kind of want to start out from the outset, because that's actually been a major impediment. And I get it. The tone and the pace of data-driven is that you and I kind of have this interaction of data engineer, software engineer, that sort of thing, right. Or AI engineer type thing. But I think that for in the interest of getting this knowledge out and making it accessible to more people, I'm cool with like, I'll record something without you, like a full on show, not just a data point, and
I
vice
am
versa.
cool with that. I am cool with that too, Frank. It just, this topic in particular has some distance from the data engineering piece of this, and you and I can both talk intelligently about that topic, and as it comes into play.
Field are a lot harder to come by.
Agreed.
In 2020, in 2025, I mean, everybody and their dog and their cousin is probably gonna, be an expert.
But this too. You're the data scientist of this team. I am not. I can dabble. I understand the kind of the end goal, but being able to practice it, especially in a billable way, that's not me. So
Right.
Yep. But yeah,
Well,
that makes perfect.
I have grown and expanded in my new role at the MTC, where I have to be more the data engineer.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So
maybe cool. I don't know.
Better understanding of that. And I was kind of reflecting on this because I've been there in role a little over 3 months. I was like, well, when I first joined, I was probably 90% data scientist, 10% data engineering, right? Just because I was on a team where we had we had the luxury of specialists, right? Whereas now I don't. So I would describe, I would know just enough data engineering to get the data I need to do data science on.
You did well, Frank. You sell yourself short on that.
Well, I mean, I just thought myself more. Now, now I'm at the point where I see myself kind of, 2/3 data scientist, 1/3 data engineer, because it kind of starts making sense to me now, and it's a process.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And particularly with something like SQL Server, I mean, there are folks that we've been fortunate to have, serious experts. People have been working on this since the beginning. In some cases, like Bob Ward, have been working on the product since the 90s.
Yeah.
No one is going to achieve that level of wisdom about the product in 3 months. So there's always that sweet spot of, effort to reward. And, so I don't know where I was going with that, but
that's good.
So that's it for this episode of Data Driven. It's a little bit shorter than usual, but we didn't really dive into any technical topics. I wanted to announce the arrival of Impact Quantum. I did register a domain name, so soon, if not today, that will point to the page at Data Driven. But I wanted to launch as quickly as possible. And be sure to check it out, impactquantum.com. And I have a fancy logo and everything, and music and all that. And I'll let our robotic voiceover lady end the show, unless you have any final thoughts, Andy.
Nothing, Frank. This was awesome.
Cool, man. Have a great day.